I love giving talks at these sites to explain them. This is Machareus, the place where John the Baptist was beheaded, and that was our first glimpse of it as we came around the corner through the mountains. We got off the bus and I got my picture taken in front of it, and now I get to explain to everybody what happened here in biblical times. You can hear the sheep down there. We're in the wilderness out here on our way to Petra. There's Mount Fortress of Machareus, where John the Baptist was imprisoned by Herod and where he was beheaded. Being arrested. Remember, John the Baptist was not arrested because he was out preaching the gospel or preaching about Jesus. Why was he arrested? Because he was criticizing the king for his illicit marriage. He was beheaded. He became a martyr based on the issue of marriage and morality. Think about that with the culture we're facing today, where Sister Lucia at Fatima said that the last battle will be over the family. That's why John the Baptist is a martyr, because he defended the biblical and basic principles of marriage, husband and a wife. So, but when Herod heard this, he said, he had heard some things going on about Jesus doing miracles, so he said, oh no, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead, for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. This prison right here, by the way. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing that him to be a righteous and a holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, happy birthday, Dean.
Oh no.
Send him up, folks.
Oh no.
So on his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials, military commanders, and leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, this is after some of that beer we just had.
Colorado beer.
He said, ask me anything you want and I'll give it to you. And he promised with an oath, whatever you ask, I'll give you, even to half of my kingdom. So she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask? The head of John the Baptist, she said. At once the girl hurried to the king with her crest. I want you to give me now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John up there, and brought him back with his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of it, John's disciples came and took his body away and laid it in a tomb. Then there's another passage in Matthew about it, but I won't read that. Now, the reason that we say that it was here is because Josephus, who was a Jewish writer, he was a Roman historian, but he was Jewish, and he wrote a lot of history of the Jewish wars and other things during the first century, which have given us inestimable information that subsequently corresponds with the Bible. And it says, now, some of the Jews, now see, he's not a Christian writing this. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly, as a punishment for what he had done to John, who was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, who was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, both as to righteousness towards one another and piety towards God, and so to come to baptize, for the washing with water was acceptable to him, and for the purification of the body. Supposing that, I'm going to get down to this part. Herod, who feared lest the great influence John had over the people might put him into power and inclination to raise a rebellion, for they seemed ready to do anything he should advise, thought it best by putting him to death, to prevent any mischief he might cause, and not bring himself into difficulties by sparing a man who might make him repent of what he would be too late. Accordingly, he was sent as a prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper to Machareus, the castle I have beforehand mentioned, and he was there at Machareus put to death. Now the Jews had an opinion that the destruction of this army was sent as a punishment upon Herod and a mark of God's displeasure for killing John there. So that is the reason. And then there's another section here about it too. But just to show that the story of John, why he was martyred, is because it's not he's preaching the gospel or talking about Jesus, but because he was defending legitimate marriage. And Herod wasn't even being a homosexual marrying another guy. I mean, this was just a kind of a, I'm going to take his wife. And John said no, and he got beheaded for it. And this is how we know, because even in the first century writing, Josephus tells us this was the place. So when we did our filming on Jesus, if you want to see the top, you can watch our movie. We had to hike all the way up there with all our camera gear. And you could see that the way he did it is he would build fortresses inside the mountain. And he had harems, and he had hot baths and cold baths, and he had every kind of luxury you could imagine. Also, just down across from here a little ways is Masada. He had the same thing over at Masada. He had enough grain to feed 1,000 men for 1,000 soldiers for 19 years, I think it was. It was just huge grain bins. And he had big reservoirs of water up there. When it rained, they had channeled all the water into these huge cisterns. And he had that fortress, and he had one in Jerusalem, and he had the Herodian, which is just by Bethlehem. I'll show you that when we're in Bethlehem. And that was a man-made mountain. He made that mountain, and he built his fortress inside the center of it. And in the writings of Josephus again, they said that when he died in Jericho, they had a great procession for Herod the Great, and they brought him up to Herodias, which is by Bethlehem, and they buried him there. And all the scholars said, no, we've never found anything, but guess what? A couple of years ago, they found his tomb in the center of the Herodian. So Herod was a megalomaniac. He was an amazing guy, though, what he could achieve and what he built. All of these fortresses, all the way up into northern Israel even. And so here's one right there. You want to hike up there, or you want to just head out?
There's the goats.